I wish I was in the UK over this past weekend, but I missed the event. How did it go?
Well, we've had a little bit of a debrief, and my personal view, I think reflected by everybody else, is that we've sort of stepped up another gear, and I think that's been a really wonderful process. And it's the third event we've run over the course of the year. We started in Bristol last year, which was fantastic. I completely admit that the structure of the day wasn't quite right. I think in our enthusiasm to get going with events, we crammed rather too much in, and we definitely corrected that when we went to Cheltenham in April, which was terrific. But I think for a whole host of reasons, York just seemed to work even better, and I think that sort of, first of all, the way in which we run the event, the speakers, which we'll get into in a minute, obviously were absolutely first class, as they have been at all of our events. But I think the way in which the audience respond, and I think that's been a really interesting progression, because by and large, there is, there's a core, we're very pleased to have a core of people who have been to probably all three events. But what was really nice for us in terms of sort of feedback of, how UK Column does have a relationship with various parts of the country, it was really nice to go north. York, I know you haven't been over here, but York is, I suppose from Cheltenham, it's maybe nearly 300 miles north. No, sorry, that's a geography check. It's not quite.
Yeah,
but
not quite.
200. Okay, whatever. Significant difference. And in British terms, that is quite significant. In many counties in between, very sort of culturally different and everything else. And it seemed to me, from the people that I did meet, there were a lot of people from that area, and that was fantastic to find that by going to somewhere else, we really were bringing in a different crowd, and I think having the core of people who had been to events previously, the atmosphere was phenomenal throughout. And it was really, really terrific. That's my view. It might sound like I'm being a bit over the top, but I really can't think of any negatives. Mike?
No, I mean, I couldn't disagree with anything you've said there. The other thing that the other difference that I think was really interesting was how many people came to me and said, I only found you 4, 5, 6 months ago. And that is pretty encouraging, bearing in mind that so many people are disengaging from news content completely at the moment. The fact that there are new people starting to ask questions is really good, and it's absolutely something we've got to take into account, because of course a lot of those people have no real no appreciation of the history of UK Column or what we've been doing. So that's going to be an interesting. It's going to be interesting to see how those people react as we come into our 20th anniversary and start talking about what's been happening for the last 20 years.
You said people have been disengaging. This is, I think, something we've touched on before, but I'd like to touch on it again, because it's a very worrying trend.
It is a worrying trend, because, I mean, to some degree, I understand it. I think that, although people had some understanding of what was going to come post-COVID, with the use of the widespread use of terms like polycrisis in documentation from World Economic Forum and other places, we should really have expected what has happened in the last 3-4 years to develop as they have, because they told us that was what was going to happen. Nonetheless, I do to some degree understand why it is too much for many people. I think the danger here is that there is an urge from media, whether that's mainstream media or alternative media, to somehow try to soften the blow of what's actually going on around us, and I think that would be a mistake. I'm starting to see, organizations that consider themselves to be serious news organizations talking about cats and ducks and stuff like this, as if that's going to bring, that might soften the totality of the information that they're putting out. But it's not going to attract back people that have disengaged from the news, and all you end up doing, in fact, is dumbing down the totality of what you're putting out. So I think it's a bad direction to go in. We can't shield people from what's going on. We've got to, as we did with COVID, we've got to, I think, try to present it in a way which is level-headed and as sane as we possibly can, and try to help people understand what's going on. But of course, for those that do disengage, the reality hasn't changed. They may be pretending that it isn't there or ignoring it, but the tornado's still coming, as the saying goes. And remember the old cartoon, I can't remember who produced it, of the people burying their heads in the sand while the tornado's coming up behind them. That isn't going to change. And if those people that do disengage are, of course, removing themselves from any opportunity to resist or any opportunity to say this is not the direction of travel that I want to be going in, and not in my name, or however you want to present that. So yeah, it is understandable in a sense, but also really something that we need to encourage people to not disengage in that way, for sure.
I think I was chatting to, I think it was Zubi, a few months ago when I was in Dubai, and he said to me that he thinks that we as humans are not designed to take in as much information as what we currently do, and I wonder if there's actually a lot of truth to that, and I wonder if there's a correlation between the amount that we absorb versus the ease of disengaging as a result.
I think I'll just answer this way. I think the biggest problem here is not that there's too much information. The problem is there's no discernment about which information is relevant and which isn't. And I think part of the problem is that people are not able to ignore a lot of the really hyped up rubbish on social media and so on that really should be getting a good ignoring. And so I think it's more about a lot of us don't have the skills for deciding what is irrelevant. I think that's the key problem here.
What, the cats and ducks?
Well, not just the cats and ducks, but actually just a lot of the people get caught up in a lot of the vitriol and a lot of the argument and it's really diversionary in many ways and totally irrelevant.
Yes, that's true. I'm sorry for jumping in, but I saw a post made by Vanessa Beeley addressing exactly this, saying that it's exhausting. When you go through a lot of effort to put out a thoughtful comment, and then you just get these sort of troll-like rubbish, low-resolution responses that it pollutes the comment thread, and it makes you want to turn off the comments, which is what she was suggesting, or just block or whatever. And then the counter response is, but now you're cancelling and censoring, etc. I actually agree with Vanessa.
It's such an odd area because it's artificial, and I don't think we've really settled down yet with it. I mean, basically, the interactions you're talking about would just never take place in
real life.
Yeah, in real life, in a face-to-face context. Mm-hmm. And so therefore, the entire situation is different. And so I don't know. People are out to waste time, cause trouble, all the rest of it. How very boring. I mean, I don't really see that there's a massive issue with if you don't necessarily want to read comments from people who are just there to waste time, and therefore you have the ability to be able to switch that off. don't see that's a massive drama. And I think to sort of conflate that with, because like you say, what about free speech? You're just censoring, you're just, whatever. Well, yeah, it's not really quite the same thing.
It's not the same.
No, it's not at all. And sorry, just to go back to what you quoted Zuby as saying, I can understand exactly why he would say that, and therefore I don't mean to disagree necessarily with him, but I think the way in which I would look at it is that there are a few different things going on, and the sheer volume of information that's presented is very difficult to make sense of, because for example, with cats and ducks, how are you to make that judgment that a story about a duck is more or less important than a story about Sudan, for example? And I know that might sound like a ridiculous point to make.
No, it's a good point.
But this stuff is just spewed out. Ukraine is such a good example of this, because if anybody had been paying attention and had looked at Ukraine in the way that they might look at a duck story now, they'd have known in 2022 what had happened in not just 2014 and thereafter, but what happened to Ukraine after the Second World War, or even before the Second World War, because it's all there. All this stuff does get put out, but people are, by and large, unable to remember it. So I think in the mainstream media / sort of government communications sphere, the way in which information is put out is very deliberately so that people who are not paying absolutely, not just sort of their full attention, but also making these points of discernment, but also connection. So they'll see something, reference to this, that, and the other, and think, hang on a minute, that connects back to either a period of time earlier or a different place or whatever, and basically making sense of the whole thing. And as I say, I think this is evidenced in the way in which people have, consider that what happened in Ukraine / Russia in 2022 just came out of nowhere, which it just didn't. And crikey, by suggesting that going back to the Second World War is far enough is absurd. I mean, it's sort of at least 1,000 years to try to make any sort of sense of it. But then the other side of it, I would say, in terms of the ability to absorb information, that, well, goes back to what Vanessa's talking about, and the way people use technology, whatever it is, but the fact that we've allowed systems to replace our brains. And Mike will be amused to remember, Mike and I took Mark Anderson out for supper on his last night in the UK, and I started what I thought was going to be a really good story, and I got halfway through it and I could not remember why I'd started it, but it was about what we call a speed awareness course in the United Kingdom, which is sort of a re-education thing that you can opt for if you get caught speeding. Either the police will take points off or put points on your driving license, or you can go on a course which tells you about to be honest, some of it's fascinating, some of it's not very well presented. The reason I started telling the story, I'm pleased to remember, was because everyone on that course, I think there were 10 people on the course I did at the start of this week. Every single one of them used a sat-nav absolutely all the time. So they have no idea where they're going at any point. So, we started this programme by talking about our event in York. I know where York is. I know how to get there because, okay, first of all, I have been there before, but I absolutely know which compass direction it's in. I know which roads you need to take to get there. And I know what landmarks and whatnot I'm passing when I do go. I got the sense, and these are not young people, by the way. These are people who are probably my age or older, and they all use a sat nav the whole time. In that they do not trust themselves to, I don't know, look at a map, find the way, remember, or any of that sort of thing. So, going back to Zuby's point, I think we have, a lot of people have, side by side, had this onslaught of information where you can't differentiate between a duck story or a humanitarian crisis, and as well as making your brain pretty much useless. So I think, in actual fact, we are perfectly well capable of absorbing enormous amounts of information. And if you think back to times where people, either remembered stuff or wrote it down, I think in terms of recall and an understanding of a complex issue, I think we were, this is going to be specific by country and by grouping, but I would say in the Western world now, particularly in the younger generations, and I know it's sort of, they're a soft target because it's very easy to say, oh, well, look at that, they're just on their tech stuff the whole time, they don't know anything, they can't do anything. That's unfair. Of course, they do know stuff and they can do stuff, but I think by and large, they have had such a battering with the memory losing devices that they I think are far less able to recall in the way that I would hope we can, but also to connect things that might at face value seem to be disconnected.
But I still think, Charles, that when you have so much stuff coming at you, Ukraine and climate change and famine and everything is negative, and there's so much of it, and the human condition also desires a story about ducks, because we want also just to feel better about our day, because we can't change what's happening in Ukraine, we can't change what's happening in Gaza.
Sorry, I'm going to stop you there because I completely disagree with that statement. We can change what's going on in Ukraine. We can change what's going on in Gaza because it's our governments.
No, I'm saying that's the way we are wired to think.
Yes, but how did that happen, Jerm? How did it get to the point where we are wired to think that we can't change these things? Because that I think is really getting to the nub of the problem. We have been so disenfranchised. We have lost any sense of agency. We've lost any sense of personal responsibility or personal power. How did that happen? I think that is a question we've got to consider. Now, I don't necessarily know the answer to that. I think it's certainly the result of a sustained psychological attack on the minds of, which comes back to, in some degree, what Charles was saying a minute ago. There's no question about the fact that the more technology comes into our lives, the more we switch our brains off, and the more we rely or we give up our own capability and tell the technology to look after us, or tell the government to look after us, or whatever it happens to be. But also on the other side, we have been told systematically that the role of government is to keep us safe, that the role of government is to do this. We have become reliant through the social security mechanisms on having this safety net there, and some people in the country are not only reliant on a safety net, they are dependent on it for everything that they consume, their food, their electricity, their gas, their housing, and so on. This is something which has been for quite a long time now systematically has been encouraged, this type of thinking. And of course, when you do that, you give up any sense that you're able to change anything or able to do anything. And this is really problematic.
Yeah, but that feeds into that desire to lie in bed and have a look at a duck story or a cat video.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean you should pander to that. That doesn't mean that you should encourage that by just laying it in front of people. Because doing that even takes people further down this road. And this is and I appreciate what you're saying. Everything looks dark and negative and horrible at the moment, and to a large degree it is. But if as dark and horrible as it is, if that isn't motivating people to want to change something, then I'm not quite sure what does.
Yes, but there's a weird contradiction, because on the one hand, with people disengaging and wanting duck stories, if you look at, as we've spoken in the past about doing uplifting conversations, people don't care. They just don't click on it. They still want that sensation. They want that doom scrolling.
I think it's a mistake to assume that, or to suggest that everyone is the same here, because of course only some people are disengaging, other people are engaging. Only
True.
Some people want the duck stories, others actually want something more serious. So it's very easy in this social media world when people react in particular ways to look at that and say, well, that's how it is, because actually even in this world of social media and engagement on comments and so on, it's still a relatively small proportion of people are doing. And the other thing that we haven't mentioned, of course, is I understand Vanessa's reaction to a lot of this, of course, but we've got to appreciate that there are professionals out there who are there to specifically cause this kind of, somebody posts a really insightful comment. There are people that are employed to make sure that is somehow the rug is pulled out from under that insightful comment. It's disparaged and made to appear less important, not only through people being employed as so-called influencers to do this 24 hours a day, but actually, increasingly bots are being deployed to do this as well. So, frankly, the comments on social media are 80% should be just discarded because they're an irrelevance. And this, I think, this comes back to the original point. We've got to learn which of what we see on social media we should just throw in the bin straight away.
Yeah, but you can't. Hold on, Mike. You can't just ignore though, because it completely pollutes any type of sane thread that might exist, that might actually have value. It's like having a large amount of dog turd on your lawn and just leaving it, and it invites nothing exciting. It's just a mess.
That's absolutely true, and of course, I completely get the dilemma here of block someone, be accused of cancel culture or censorship or whatever. I think we've increasingly, as Charles said earlier, got to ignore that. It's not censorship. It's about having an adult conversation, and if somebody isn't coming to you with an adult conversation, they have no, there are other places they can go. But it is tricky. I'm not trying to underestimate how tricky it is. Everybody's got their own decisions to make on who they allow to, as you say, pollute their particular channel on social media, and I absolutely see there's a certain irony to what I've just said, because of course it could be argued that being kicked off YouTube was simply YouTube taking this decision on in the case of the UK column. So I'm not suggesting that this is a simple or that there's even necessarily a right way to deal with the problem.
Well, I think if we're going to split that particular hair, I think I don't think that does stack up for YouTube, because they are not running the conversation. They're not putting the subject out there in any particular way and then inviting people to comment. They're just deciding from, once they see what's gone out there, whether or not they think it should be permissible at all. I think that really is a totally different thing, and that they shouldn't be given any quarter there.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I would absolutely agree with that. I just mentioned that because I know somebody else will.
yeah. But also the other thing, I think the other point to make, and I know this, I've come to learn this sort of personally, which I do find fascinating, is that yes, I know, and going back to Vanessa's sort of specific frustration, I do appreciate that if the way in which stuff is set out, because it sort of remains there forever. One intelligent comment followed by 5 stupid ones, let's say, or, maybe stupid is not the right word, but 5 just antagonistic or, pointless, detrimental comments doesn't look good. But then again, I think we do people a disservice to think that they will be swayed by seeing something that looks like in the way that you're sort of describing a lawn. I think people are perfectly capable of seeing who's trying to cause trouble and what comment is worth consideration. So I think that's one of the things. And also, as part of the same point, there are, let's face it, the absolutely overwhelming majority of people that engage with any of this stuff don't comment. They only ever look. And so it's always, and it doesn't matter what the forum is really, but it is always disproportionately skewed in favour of those who want to comment. And that psyche, let's say, has a tendency to attract people who just want to cause trouble. That's why they do it. So it's the whole thing is it looks very different from how it actually is. And the reason I say that I can qualify that personally is because I put stuff out on LinkedIn in particular because, for whatever it's worth, LinkedIn describes itself, and I think a lot of the people who do use it think it is a professional network, and therefore it's sort of, it's a bit more serious and this, that and the other. I'm not sure how far one can really go with that. It's basically people trying to flog stuff is what it really is. But the point is that because I've had the advantage or disadvantage of doing a number of different things in life, I've got a sort of network of people from lots of different places, let's say. And what I found fascinating over the time that I've been involved with UK Column is that having put stuff out into what seems like a vacuum, because people are so... Actually, there is a serious point that comes out of this, but basically it goes into a vacuum. People don't comment, really. They don't respond. That's changed slightly recently with posts about digital identity, which seems to be less controversial. And yet, when I go out and about and see people that I haven't seen for years or, that I've known from this, that and the other, they all know what it is that I've been doing and what it is that I've been putting out, and by and large they approve. And yet you'd never know that because they don't respond. And this goes right back to the sort of disengagement thing, which is that it's very easy, I think, for us to be in the position that we're in, where we are doing basically as a job, we are sort of discussing this stuff, researching it, putting it out, and trying to help people do the same. But if you're not doing that, it's a very, very it's a hard battle, both personally and professionally, to be out of kilter with society as it's sort of pushed or directed. And what I mean by that is specifically on the professional side of it. In the United Kingdom, I don't like to use the phrase cost of living crisis because it's obviously an engineered crisis. But the fact is that food, which is an easy one to observe, the price of food has gone up a huge amount in the last couple of years. So the whole thing of making ends meet, and therefore, right, well, how do you actually make that work if you're trying to follow a course of resistance or something that's ideologically driven, when actually what it comes down to is, can you still eat and pay the bills if you're doing the thing that you're doing, and that thing happens to be supporting a system that you're trying to react against? So, a large number of people who want to resist find themselves in a situation where they're sort of constrained by the fact that they are perhaps in a profession that doesn't actually accord with their values now when they really think about it, but they are in a position where they're struggling to be able to do anything about it. And I think that's a problem that can't be dismissed at all, or should be given quite a bit of attention. Whereas when we went back to, say, 2020, 2021, it was kind of universal. The idea that liberty had been taken away was universal. It happened to everyone. And therefore I don't think you did risk sort of professional suicide, as it were, by speaking out against that. And the same thing with the idea that there was to be a mandatory vaccine. Whereas now a lot of the things are, they're a bit more oblique, and therefore I think it's much harder going, both professionally, as I say, but also personally, sort of groups of friends or families and whatnot. And I think that also explains the disengagement.
Isn't it ironic how we hear about the dangers of the so-called Chinese social credit system and government control of behaviours and being able to survive in society depending on how you behave, when in fact we live in a society where we absolutely have to behave in a particular way, or we lose our livelihoods and so on. We have absolutely zero awareness of the system we actually live in.
Yeah. Well, this goes absolutely to the heart of it. It's both things, because I would say in the sphere within which we operate, China has become sort of the latest proxy of sort of, right, well, if you say anything positive about China, or anything about China that isn't sort of calling out the social credit system and this, that and the other, then you're controlled opposition, or you're sort of somehow Chinese. I mean, I don't know what you're supposed to be, but the point is it's getting a lot more attention now, and it's classic, isn't it? Because it is absolutely shying away from exactly what you describe. It's people who are completely ignoring what's happening in this country, or at least maybe not ignoring, but not conceding at all that this is the case. And, okay, how can I say this with any degree of authority? But those sorts of people who are saying that and pointing towards, Chinese social credit system and this, that and the other, how many of those people are shopping on Amazon and buying all their food in supermarkets, and therefore absolutely perpetuating the system that they say they don't want to enter into? I mean, it is very, very straightforward. Okay, I know that slightly goes back to the personal, professional difficulty thing, but not really. And we this does come up a lot, and I appreciate it's difficult if you're in a large metropolitan area. But if you're not, getting hold of proper food from somebody who isn't a corporate beer moth is not actually that difficult, and is a massive gesture of resistance. It really, really is, because it cuts out the government and it cuts out the corporations. And I will continue to bang on about this, because it is so important, and the effect that can have by increment is massive.
Do you think there's a formula, or are we just constantly going to bumble and fumble our way through this?
That's what a question.
Yeah, that's a good one. I don't know. I think I would shy away from suggesting that there is a formula, on the basis that I don't believe that. Well, again, I know we've talked about this before, but I don't believe that a country of this size, 68 million people, and okay, devolution accepted, but I don't believe we should be considered to be sort of one homogenous body of people that can be run by one system, and therefore I don't think, sort of by the same token, there's really particularly a formula that would work. I don't know, that might be pedantic, or maybe I'm not exactly understanding what you might mean by formula, but I think in being prescriptive, sort of saying, oh, well, this is how you do it, this is how you beat the system, I think trouble sort of lies there. I think people have to absolutely find their own way, and because also you're sort of straying into white knight Donald Trump territory of, someone's going to save us because, he said if you do this, it will all work out well. Well, I don't like the way that could end, really. And also, the other thing is that I think the danger with, say, a formula is actually it sort of it disempowers to a certain extent, because you haven't come up with it yourself. You're sort of following somebody else's scheme. Are you really invested in it? And then if it goes wrong, guess what? Somebody else gets the blame. It wasn't your fault. You did what you could, but it was someone else's fault. And actually, I think we need to own everything that goes right, but also everything that goes wrong. So. Yeah, I think probably not. But I don't know. I mean, what do you have in mind when you say formula?
I mean, are we going to be having the same conversation 25 years from now? With exactly the same issues, with exactly the same.
Probably not, because a number of things, a number of possibilities lie in front of us. Nuclear annihilation is certainly one of them, so we may not be here in 25 years. But we might be living in an absolute technocracy with every aspect of our lives controlled, in which case we won't be having this conversation either. Or we might have decided that actually this is neither of these options for the future is one that we want to pursue, and that we decide actually we want to live the good life, or however you want to describe it, and that's I think we've said this many times on this program, but this is where it begins. I don't think there's a formula for it, as Charles just said. I think that this is something that we all have to work out for ourselves, but it simply begins with us. We're so many of us are totally caught up in the so-called rat race on a hamster wheel, however you want to describe it, just trying to keep our heads above water, keep food on the table, keep ourselves with a roof over our heads. And at some point, we've got to, instead of coming home from work after a long day and sitting down and watching EastEnders or whatever it is, we've got to just switch the television off and say, right, what kind of life do I actually want? And could I be spending whatever free time I have finding the farmer who's prepared to sell direct to me, or finding somebody else or 4 or 5 other people that think similarly to the way I do, and see if we can build some kind of self-help group on a number of different issues. It begins there. The diversions for what are going on are plenty. We just need to switch the television on and sit down in front of it, and we can switch our brains off again for another and pretend it's not happening. So I don't say any of this with any underestimation of how hard that is to do, but it begins with a decision, and that's I think the only option that people have, because I don't see any of the futures that are being offered by the so-called establishment at the moment. I don't see that any of them are a future that we want to embrace.
There's a very interesting sort of byline conversation happening there. You mentioned, networking with people with whom you have common interests. This is something that we've been talking about for years now. I think the vaccine, for example, brought a lot of people together. And I think this feeds into this sort of disengagement thing, because when you don't have something that's common, then you start feeling isolated, and then you want to pull back. And I think that's why so many people felt like they had found their tribe, when the vaccines were being rolled out, and they suddenly all came together, and there was this unified cause. And it was a great moment, in history for a very short while. But then a friend of mine made such an interesting comment. He said, have you noticed, though, we all agree on this one talking point, but bring up another 8 talking points and see if you agree. And suddenly you agree on nothing. And there's an interesting psychology there. I don't know where I'm going with this, but it did strike a chord with me that made me realize that finding common ground is actually quite difficult.
Yes, I absolutely agree, and I think that has been the undoing of quite a lot of sort of initiatives, particularly community-based initiatives, where in the exactly like you say, the sort of the vaccine kind of apogee of that intense vaccine pressure and whatnot. There was sort of we all think the same. We can all go and do the same. We all want the same thing. Let's just go to wherever and do that thing, and it'll all be fine. And actually, the truth of it is, it probably won't be. Which is, on one level disappointing. I think also it's a bit of a reflection into how we are not any good at agreeing to disagree anymore, and just holding different views, but being able to, sort of rub alongside each other. and actually, just to go back, going back to the formula, I was thinking, on the 25-year question, where would we be? I think, I mean, Mike, sort of, where you were going with that. I think one would hope that there would be small communities sort of dotted around all over the place, because human nature is such that the majority are never going to stray too far off course, but small and determined minorities might absolutely and should change the course of history. Maybe not for everybody, but certainly for themselves. And I think the examples, I suppose this is in a way sort of a formula, but look at the Amish or the Mennonite communities in particular. I think they're such good examples, because you could say, well, oh, what about the Inuit or something? There are lots of populations in parts of the world who are effectively doing it completely differently. They're self-sufficient, they're independent of government corporations, they don't have any of the influences on their lives that we are talking about now. But I think what's interesting about the Amish and the Mennonites is that they're in countries where they are absolutely going against the prevailing wind, and yet, as far as I'm aware, they thrive, and they have no requirement for government or corporate intervention, and they still manage to live exactly the lives they want to live. So I don't mean to suggest that that is therefore what one does in prescriptive sense. You do exactly those things, but I think the point is that you can look to quite significant chunks of society and see how they can do it in a totally different way that does work. So I don't think there should be any cause for defeatism at all. And at a stroke, the idea that technocracy is imminent and there's nothing we can do about it, I think is not the case. It's a choice, and okay, people might react against that. Well, I mean, there you are. That's your choice. So if you accept, as I think I'm afraid I do, that you're not going to overturn the entire system, because I don't think there's going to be a significant groundswell that will make that happen. I think that the answer lies in just being able to, having the wherewithal to operate completely outside it, and then you cannot be interfered with. And so these sorts of discussions in 25 years' time would be held in person in meeting halls dotted around the country.
Just to add to that, we're also forgetting our history. I mean, Second World War, French resistance. There was no French resistance. There was no organization at a national level called the French Resistance, right? This is really important. Everybody's looking for the big hero to come along, whether it be Trump or whoever. On one hand, on the other hand, they're looking for national campaigns, and this is not going to work. We've got to be getting organized at a local level. The great example is in recent times. I think it was the work of Ian R. Crane in the UK. Many people in other countries won't necessarily know who he was, but he was an oil man. He was, I think, one of the first civilians into Iraq after Desert Storm, and it completely changed his view of the world because of what he saw. And there are videos online where he talks about this. But in later years, because of his experience in the oil industry, he began when fracking was being discussed as an option for gas generation in the UK or gas mining in the UK. He absolutely came out against that, and he was undoubtedly a leader of the resistance to that particular corporate agenda, but he refused from the beginning to be a leader in the sense of a national organization. He was absolutely determined that if the fracking companies were going into a community, that the community should lead the opposition to it. The community should be the basis of the resistance. And yes, there were people within the anti-fracking community who went from site to site and campaigned in each of the places. But actually, the resistance was local. It was community-led. And there was never any opportunity for a national anti-fracking organization to really develop. And I think that was one of the most successful campaigns, and it was largely because of his efforts to convince people to do things in small groups at a local level, and they could cooperate and so on. But basically, if we think back to the French resistance, each individual resistance cell didn't know anything about any other resistance cell, and so the resistance was able to happen in an autonomous way without asking anybody for permission, without any opportunity really for the Nazis to infiltrate in a significant way. I mean, of course, there were disasters, but not to the degree that the resistance could not continue to operate. And this is the way we need to be thinking. We need to actually be thinking local, and we need to be thinking in tight-knit groups, small communities, and that then becomes the basis for bigger and better things. There's
the formula.
That is a formula. I'm not saying it's the formula. And I mean, another great example of that is Hope Sussex, which was established by 2 or 3 people because they were unhappy with mainstream education, and they have created a local organization, which is really a light for anybody that wants to do something similar. It's a great example of local organization and producing something that's really valuable.
Yeah, it absolutely is, and it's the asymmetric nature of any of these things. We have one system, a national system. Therefore, if you set up a national sort of reaction to that or resistance to it, it's very, very easy to dismantle, because the architecture to oppose it is absolutely right there to match it. Doing stuff locally that is at least only loosely connected is far, far more difficult for the authorities or whoever it is that wants to try and dismantle that to actually deal with. So,
sorry, I just want to add one more point on that, because just to give you an idea of what the anti-fracking campaigns were up against, what the man who was really one of the major corporate leaders that was attempting to bring fracking to the UK was Jim Ratcliffe, who owns Ineos. He's certainly, correct me if I'm wrong, Charles, he's certainly the richest man in this, it's corporate head in this country. So this was not small-scale stuff that these guys were campaigning against, and they won. And there is no fracking in this country because the companies gave up. It was too hard for them. They couldn't make any progress. So, it is possible to beat the system in that case, and that can be done at a local level with people of a certain age even, and and they can win. So we should be taking inspiration from that.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so I still like that idea that you were discussing, Mike. The looking inward, family, community. This is something we speak about all the time, but I do think it is a formula, and I think it is a great formula, because it does lead to. If you looked at it like an equation, it does lead to a better result, because it feeds into the idea that you start with yourself, and as Catherine Fitz often argues, you change people one by one. You can't change masses of people. It's very difficult to do that, but it's easier to change people one by one, and you do that when you are in close proximity to yourself and the person around you, if that makes sense. And that change gradually spreads outwards. And I think a lot of people have it flipped, and they think that they want to create this massive change from far away first and somehow bring it back closer to them. I think that's the wrong way around.
Yeah.
Not sure what to say to that. I mean, I absolutely agree.
I was going to agree.
Yeah,
Sorry, I was agreeing
agree.
silently. I was thinking of ducks, but agreeing with that.
Yeah, okay. Look.
Yeah, but that also is why people want duck stories, because they get so overwhelmed by all the big stuff that they feel like they can't change. And so they suddenly disengage and become reclusive and just want to laugh at a cat falling off a windowsill. And I think that is, like I said in the beginning, I think that is part of the human condition, which is why I asked the question about the amount of information we can absorb. You believe that we are able to absorb large amounts of information, and I think that's a compelling argument. But then it comes down to how we filter through that information.
Yeah, it does. I would also say, I mean, let's not get too hung up on cats falling off windowsills, but I would say that you should be able to do both. I think you know, if you're going to have a rounded existence, then you've got to have the capacity for enjoying life. I think a lot of what we talk about is really pretty serious. It's profound life choices and things that are, you know, well, we reckon at least, are going to determine not just our future, but that of our children and grandchildren. That is big stuff. And it does need to be balanced in that life has got to be fun. And if it's not, then that really is something that needs to be addressed. If that means the pendulum swings further and further towards the cat on or off windowsill thing, then yeah, that's I would say that's a concern. But you know, all of this should be with a view to having fun. Our event in York was a really good example of that. We had 5 talks and a UK column panel discussion, and the subjects raised were incredibly serious and at times grim insofar as they concerned medical ethics and the way in which people are systematically destroyed in effect by the National Health Service and vaccinations and you know, all sorts of grim stuff. But the mood of the day was really, really positive. It was a really great atmosphere. And people had fun. Now, I don't mean that people were just there, you know, laughing at the misfortune of others. That is absolutely not what I mean at all. Just to clarify that. But we are. I think, you know, part of our condition is to enjoy ourselves, and I think we need to concentrate quite a lot on doing that. And if that means, you know, enjoying a frivolous story about this, that, and the other, well, I mean, you know, so be it. That is, I mean, it's something we need to be better at, actually. But on the UK column news, you know, we will, when time affords, get in the last bit will be a, you know, kind of and finally story, which is usually funny and that, you know, that is an important part of it, because a lot of what we talk about is very serious and can give people the impression that life is universally sort of dismal and we're all going in the wrong direction. Well, I don't believe that for a minute. I think we need to be aware of all this stuff, but there is absolutely a way with which we deal with it, and as we do that, part of that process, part of any process, has to be to enjoy the things that one enjoys. I mean, you know, life has hilarious moments in it all the time. We need to make sure that we're making the most of those as well, because I do think that, you know, one very good way of preventing yourself from getting stuff done is to be trapped in a sort of negative paradigm, and then absolutely you won't achieve stuff. If you know, it really does sort of lift the spirits and lift the soul to have that dimension of enjoyment and humour and whatnot, and it, you know, it opens your mind to all sorts of things, and it makes you feel that stuff can be done and is possible, which is you know, that's got to be the start point for anything.
So you're recommending speed awareness courses, are you, Charles?
Yeah, I mean, actually, top tip. They, I you know, I may or may not know this via personal experience, but they do offer them by county. So, for the sake of argument,
if you want to do, how many counties are in Britain?
Yeah, well, you know, in terms of the sort of 25-year thing and spreading the word, I mean, I had limited opportunity to put these sorts of views across during the course, but there were, you know, we did have a little bit of sort of chat. But yeah, so and this should come through in any interaction we have with people. It's a great way for minds to meet. You think when things are sort of humorous and lighthearted and whatnot, and then you can, of course you can engage with serious topics. But I don't think we should not be serious all the time. That would be in my view a pity.
So what's the moral of the story?
What's the moral of the story?
Yeah, Mike's good on those. Go on, Mike.
Am I?
What is the moral of the story?
The moral of the story.
Let me ask it differently. My wife's a great example of disengaging. She knows what I do, and for years and years and years, what I do has almost always been negative. If you look at what I draw or what I speak about, it's always not necessarily negative, I suppose, but dark might be a better description. And she'll lie in bed.
But hold on a second, Jerm. For example, what you just said there was what you draw. Well, there is a great example of you dealing with what you see around you through the creative process, and you are in effect easing whatever pressure you feel by actually putting out there something which represents what you're seeing in the world. That in itself is therapeutic.
Yes, but what I'm saying to you is my wife's a great example of looking at a duck story or a cat video. She's like, no, I'm out. This is just too much. And not always, but what I mean is that right there is precisely what we've sort of been speaking about. And I don't know how you turn that around. I can't say, no, I think you need to read more about what's happening in Ukraine. That doesn't work. And also the response would be, why? Because I know what's going on. What more must I know? Do you know what I mean? So that's why I was asking about a formula or moral of the story, or if there's some sort of
the moral of the
life
story
hack.
in that case is it's not enough to just know. The moral of the story is we've got to use what we know as a driver for something different, and we've discussed during some examples during the course of this conversation what those might be the driver of, but you express yourself creatively using your artwork. Lots of other people have creative skills that could be used in this way, and use our creativity to as part of the package of resistance.
Yes.
But the moral of the story is actually, as I said earlier, and this is by no means a criticism of anybody that has disengaged, but they've disengaged from something which is coming, whether they like it or not. And now would be the time to be resisting, not after it's too late.
I just want to point out something, Charles. I've been quite enjoying the sound of your chickens in the background, and it reminded me that I had unpasteurized milk this week. It's very difficult to get, I think, in pretty much every country. The governments really, really don't want you having unpasteurized milk, and you have to find creative ways to get it. And I was just reminded now listening to your chickens that we've got unpasteurized milk, and I'm alive, and so is my son and my wife. Isn't it amazing?
It's a miracle. Yes, I mean that is that is insane. That absolutely gets to the heart of how far wrong things can go, and indeed how gullible people can be. The majority of people who've never given the matter any thought would think that you would die if you drink raw milk. It's completely absurd. But of course, if you do want to, and the law says you can't, there are ways around it, like having a cow. So all of this can be done. It really can. And Scotland, bizarrely, raw milk is illegal to sell in Scotland, but it doesn't mean you can't produce it, and it doesn't mean there aren't ways in which people can get their hands on it. And I think people need to care slightly less about the extraordinarily trivial sort of regulations that say one thing and in a way try to prohibit people from living a way of life that they want to live. Now, I'm not inciting widespread breaking of laws, but one has to read into the detail and find a way to work around these things. And also, it doesn't take a huge amount for the system to be overwhelmed. It really doesn't in those sorts of instances. But yeah, no, I mean, raw milk, that it's a great one as a symbol of resistance. I mean, how ridiculous it sounds, but raw milk has become sort of emblematic. It really has, and that's fantastic because just look at how the backfire effect works. Okay, it can work for us if we're trying to convince somebody of something we know, but actually equally it works exactly the other way around, which is if the government are heavy-handed with legislation or regulations or whatever concerning something like raw milk, well, what does that do? It makes everybody interested in raw milk. Well, that's brilliant.
Well, that's why I brought it up now, because we're coming in for the landing, and I thought it would be a nice, uplifting reminder that you, as Mike, you said earlier, you can make a difference, and you can make a big difference by making lots of little differences. One of them would be pushing back and resisting stupid regulations like milk.
Yeah, it absolutely would. You're so right.
But if we want to end with a sort of mantra that we might want to consider living by, it is embrace inconvenience. Because everything
embrace inconvenience. I like
everything that's being thrown at us is in the name of convenience. Get your digital ID and make your life very easy. Have your mobile phone with your banking app on it, because that makes life easy. Don't go into a bank branch. Don't go to a standard till at a supermarket. These are what we're told all the time. Make sure you use the automated systems. Don't pick up the phone if you need to speak to the tax man. Use the automated system. Don't pick up the phone if you want to speak to a doctor. Use the automated system. That's what's being sold to us, and that's what we need to reject. And that means embracing inconvenience.
That is such a great tagline. Embrace inconvenience. Mike, you're quite creative. Okay.
Oh dear.
On that note, catch up with you guys next week.